On a seemingly ordinary Christmas Eve, billionaire Marcus Stone played a cruel joke that would change his life forever. When 8-year-old Elise asked to play his piano, he mocked her. But she responded with a Chopin performance that left 200 executives in absolute silence. The cleaning lady's daughter's impossible talent awakened buried memories and a desperate investigation that would reveal the most shocking truth. For 8 years, Marcus had completely ignored his own daughter, who grew up in poverty while he amassed billions. The discovery that Elise was his blood forced him to confront not only his past, but also a present where his heir had been invisible before his eyes. But when the media uncovered the scandal, a brutal legal war threatened to destroy them both. The final twist would come through a secret will that no one expected. Not even Marcus knew of its existence. What was written in that document would change everything they thought they knew about family, forgiveness, and second chances. If you're enjoying this emotional journey, smash that like button and tell me in the comments what you think will happen next. Your engagement keeps these stories coming. The champagne glasses clinked like church bells across the marble floors of Stone Industries' 42nd floor. December snow painted the Manhattan windows white as billionaire CEO Marcus Stone adjusted his Italian silk tie, surveying his corporate Christmas party with the satisfaction of a king viewing his kingdom. 200 of New York's most powerful executives filled the space, their laughter echoing off crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's homes. Marcus Stone hadn't built a $20 billion empire by accident. At 45, his steel-grey eyes had seen every boardroom battle, every hostile takeover, every moment when weakness meant financial death. Tonight, surrounded by senators, judges, and Fortune 500 CEOs, he felt that familiar rush of absolute power. His custom Armani suit cost more than some families spent on Christmas, and he wore that fact like armor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus's voice cut through the conversations like a blade. The room fell silent instantly. When Marcus Stone spoke, smart people listened. "Before we continue our celebration, I thought I'd share something special with you." He gestured toward the pristine Steinway grand piano, positioned near the floor-to-ceiling windows. A little Chopin to set the mood. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Marcus walked to the piano, his footsteps echoing with authority. He'd learned piano at Harvard, not from passion, but because powerful men were expected to have refined tastes. His fingers found the keys with mechanical precision, launching into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The melody filled the room with cold perfection, technically flawless, but somehow empty. Like everything else in Marcus's carefully constructed world, as the final notes faded, applause thundered across the room. "Magnificent, Marcus," called Senator Williams. "Absolutely brilliant," shouted Judge Richardson. But Marcus barely heard them. Something had caught his eye, a small figure standing near the service entrance, clutching a worn coat that had seen too many winters. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and shoes that had been resoled more times than replaced. She stood perfectly still, her bright eyes fixed on the piano with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. Behind her, a woman in a cleaning uniform tried to pull her away, whispering urgently in Spanish. "Mama, please," the little girl said in clear English, her voice carrying across the now quiet room. Just for a minute. Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward the interruption. Heat rushed to his face. How dare someone's child disrupt his perfect evening? He recognized the woman now, Maria Rodriguez, one of the night shift cleaners. She cleaned his office every evening, invisible as furniture, exactly the way he preferred his employees. The little girl broke free from her mother's grip and walked toward the piano with determination that belonged on someone 3 times her age. Her small hand pointed at the keys with reverence that Marcus had never felt for anything in his life. "Sir," she said, looking directly into Marcus's eyes without fear. "May I please play something?" The room erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Marcus heard Judge Richardson whisper to his wife, "Can you believe this?" Senator Williams shook his head in amusement. 200 of the most powerful people in America watched Marcus Stone face down an 8-year-old girl in a $15 dress. Marcus's pride ignited like gasoline meeting flame. His mouth twisted into the cruel smile he reserved for crushing business rivals. "You want to play piano, little girl?" His voice carried just enough mockery to make his audience chuckle. "Tell you what, if you can play Chopin as well as I just did, I'll adopt you myself. How's that sound?" The laughter grew louder. Marcus felt that familiar rush of dominance, the same feeling he got when he destroyed competitors or fired employees. The little girl's mother looked mortified, tugging at her daughter's arm and apologizing in rapid Spanish. But the girl didn't move. She stared at Marcus with those unnervingly bright eyes and said something that made his blood run cold. "What piece would you like me to play?" The laughter died in Marcus's throat. Something in the little girl's voice, calm, confident, completely unafraid, sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the December wind outside. Around the room, conversation stopped mid-sentence. 200 powerful people found themselves leaning forward, drawn into a moment that felt suddenly electric with possibility. "Elise, por favor," her mother whispered, her cleaning uniform wrinkled from a 12-hour shift. "We need to go. I'm sorry, Mr. Stone." "She doesn't understand." "I understand perfectly, Mama," Elise said, without taking her eyes off Marcus. Her small hands moved to the piano bench, and she climbed up with the practiced motion of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. "Which Chopin piece, sir?" Marcus felt a strange sensation in his chest, something between anger and curiosity. The girl's confidence was absolute, unshakable. In 45 years of crushing dreams and destroying careers, he'd never met anyone who looked at him without fear, especially not a child wearing shoes held together with tape. "Play whatever you want," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "But when you fail, you and your mother leave immediately. And Maria," he turned to the cleaning woman, "find a new job." The cruelty of his words hung in the air like poison. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared speak against Marcus Stone. Maria Rodriguez's face went pale as death. She needed this job, needed the insurance, needed every dollar to keep her small family alive in expensive Manhattan. Elise's hands settled on the keys with impossible grace. She closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, something had changed. The scared little girl was gone, replaced by someone ancient and wise and utterly fearless. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the room like liquid gold. Marcus felt his legs go weak. This wasn't the simple piece he'd played. This was one of Chopin's most complex compositions, a piece that took professional pianists years to master. The melody soared and dove, painting pictures of love and loss and triumph that Marcus had never felt in his carefully controlled existence. But it wasn't just the technical perfection that stopped Marcus's heart. It was the emotion pouring from this 8-year-old girl's soul. Every note carried weight, meaning a depth of feeling that made Marcus's earlier performance sound like a computer program. Tears began flowing down faces throughout the room as Elise's playing reached inside their chests and reminded them of everything beautiful they'd forgotten in their pursuit of power and money. Senator Williams wiped his eyes openly. Judge Richardson's wife clutched her husband's arm. Marcus watched millionaire after millionaire reduced to silent weeping by a child's music and felt something crack inside his own chest. The melody built to its climactic passage, and Elise's small fingers danced across the keys with impossible speed and precision. She wasn't just playing the notes. She was channeling something divine, something that transcended technique and entered the realm of pure artistry. The music filled every corner of the massive room, every corner of every heart present, turning a corporate Christmas party into something sacred. As the final notes faded into silence, not one person moved. The only sound was the soft whisper of snow against the windows and the collective breathing of 200 people who had just witnessed something miraculous. Elise's hands fell to her lap, and she looked at Marcus with those bright, ancient eyes. "Was that acceptable, sir?" Marcus tried to speak, but found his throat completely closed. Memories were flooding back, memories he'd buried so deep he'd convinced himself they were dreams. A young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, just like Elise's. A passionate affair 9 years ago, a confrontation, accusations. A woman who disappeared from his life as suddenly as she'd entered it. His hands were shaking as he stared at this impossible child who had just proven that miracles could happen on a December night in Manhattan. But the miracle wasn't her playing. It was the growing certainty that his cruel joke might have accidentally revealed the most important truth of his life. Marcus Stone had built his fortune on reading people's faces, on catching the micro-expressions that revealed lies, fear, and weakness. Now, staring at Elise's delicate features in the golden light from the chandeliers, he saw something that made his world tilt on its axis. His own eyes looking back at him. The same steel-grey color, the same shape, the same intensity that had intimidated presidents and prime ministers. How had he never noticed? How had he walked past this child countless times over the years and never seen himself reflected in her face? "Sweet Mary, Mother of God," whispered Mrs. Patterson, the elderly wife of a Supreme Court justice. "I've never heard anything so beautiful in my 83 years. The spell broke, and suddenly everyone was talking at once. Applause thundered through the room, but it wasn't polite corporate clapping. It was the desperate, emotional applause of people who had just witnessed something that changed them forever. "Incredible!" Senator Williams rushed forward, tears still streaming down his face. "Young lady, where did you learn to play like that? Who's your teacher?" demanded Patricia Hoffman, the famous conductor's wife. "I must know immediately." But Marcus barely heard their questions. His mind was racing backward through time, calculating dates, remembering details he'd pushed away. 9 years ago, Elena Rodriguez, a brilliant young woman working as a translator at his firm. Beautiful, passionate. Everything Marcus's cold world wasn't. Their affair had lasted 3 months before she'd vanished overnight, leaving only a letter he'd never read and thrown away in anger. Elena Rodriguez, Maria Rodriguez. The names hit him like physical blows. How many Rodriguez families could there be working in his building? How many 8-year-old girls with his exact eyes could exist in Manhattan? "Mama," Elise was saying to the cleaning woman, "they want to know about my lessons." Maria Rodriguez looked terrified, cornered like a hunted animal. She pulled her daughter close, whispering rapid Spanish that Marcus couldn't understand, but he caught one word, repeated over and over: peligro, danger. "I taught myself," Elise announced to the crowd, her voice clear and proud. "We have an old keyboard at home. Sometimes I play the piano at St. Mary's when Father Miguel lets me." "Impossible," breathed Patricia Hoffman. "No one learns Chopin from an old keyboard." "You've had professional training. I can hear it in your phrasing." Marcus stepped forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Maria," his voice cut through the crowd's chatter like a knife. "Maria Rodriguez." The cleaning woman looked up at him with eyes full of terror and something else. Guilt. Deep, crushing guilt that told Marcus everything he needed to know. "We need to go," Maria whispered, grabbing Elise's hand. "It's late, Mija. You have school tomorrow." But Marcus was already moving, his mind sharp as a razor despite the chaos in his chest. "Wait." The single word carried such authority that both mother and daughter froze. "Elise, how old are you?" 8.5, sir." 8.5. Marcus did the math instantly. Conception would have been late spring 9 years ago, exactly when he'd been with Elena. And your mother's name? Elena Rodriguez, Elise said proudly. But everyone calls her Maria here because it's easier for Americans to say. The room went dead silent. Marcus felt 200 pairs of eyes watching him, sensing drama but not understanding its magnitude. His hands were shaking as he looked from the little girl's face to her mother's, seeing the truth written in their shared features, their shared fear. Elena, his Elena, the woman who had loved him, who had tried to tell him something important before disappearing, the letter he'd thrown away without reading, the phone calls he'd refused to take. "Oh my God," he whispered, so softly only Maria could hear. "Oh my God, what have I done?" Maria's face crumpled with 9 years of held-back tears. She pulled Elise protectively against her side, as if she could shield her daughter from a truth that was already blazing, as bright as the Manhattan skyline beyond the windows. Marcus reached out with a trembling hand toward the little girl who might be his daughter, then stopped, because suddenly he understood Maria's terror, understood why she'd hidden in plain sight for nearly a decade. He was Marcus Stone. He destroyed everything he touched. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest, "thank you for a wonderful evening. The party is over." The dismissal hit the crowd like a bucket of ice water. These were people accustomed to being in control, to staying as long as they pleased. But something in Marcus's tone, desperate, dangerous, made even Senator Williams gather his coat without argument. "Marcus, what's wrong?" Patricia Hoffman asked, concern creasing her brow. The evening was just getting interesting. "Now," Marcus repeated, his eyes never leaving Maria and Elise. "Everyone out. Security will escort you." Within 15 minutes, the ballroom that had hosted 200 people was empty except for 3 figures: a billionaire whose world was crumbling, a cleaning woman who'd carried secrets for 9 years, and an 8-year-old girl who had no idea she'd just changed everything. Maria clutched Elise's hand like a lifeline, backing toward the service elevator. "Come, Mija, we're going home." "Wait," Marcus said, his voice breaking on the word. "Please, just wait." The silence stretched between them like a canyon. Outside, snow continued to fall on Manhattan, blanketing the city in white, while inside, 3 lives balanced on the edge of transformation. "Her birthday," Marcus whispered. "When is her birthday?" Maria's shoulders sagged in defeat. "August 15th. August 15th. Marcus closed his eyes and counted backward. 9 months from August put conception in November, exactly when he and Eleanor had been together. When they'd spent those stolen weeks pretending he could be someone other than Marcus Stone, corporate shark. "You tried to tell me," he said, the words tasting like ashes. "The letter, the phone calls." 57 phone calls, Maria said quietly, her English perfect despite her fear. "I called 57 times before I gave up." Marcus remembered now, his secretary screening his calls, protecting him from some hysterical woman who kept calling about something personal. He'd been closing a major merger, making hundreds of millions. He'd told his secretary to block her completely. "I was scared," Maria continued, tears flowing freely. "You were so powerful, so rich. I thought you'd try to take her away. Or worse, I thought you wouldn't care at all." The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. She'd been right on both counts. 9 years ago, he would have either ignored his daughter completely or used his money and power to steal her away from the only mother she'd ever known. Either choice would have destroyed this bright, impossible child. Elise looked between the adults, confusion growing in her steel-grey eyes, his eyes. "Mama, what's wrong? Why is everyone crying?" Marcus knelt down to her level, his expensive suit forgotten on the marble floor. Up close, the resemblance was undeniable. She had his eyes, his stubborn chin, even the way she tilted her head when thinking, but she also had something he'd never possessed. Warmth, kindness, a light that came from being loved unconditionally. "Elise," he said gently, "what I said before, about adopting you if you played well, I was being mean. I was making a joke." "I know," Elise said simply. "Adults make mean jokes sometimes when they're scared." The words hit him like lightning. When they're scared. This 8-year-old child had read him better in 5 minutes than business rivals managed in years of negotiation. "What am I scared of?" he asked, genuinely curious. Elise studied his face with those ancient eyes. "You're scared of loving people, because love hurts sometimes, and you don't like hurting." Marcus felt his carefully constructed walls crashing down. "You're very smart." "Mama says I get that from my father," Elise said innocently. "She says he was the smartest man she ever met, but also the most afraid." Maria gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. She'd never told Elise who her father was, but somehow their daughter had intuited the truth. Marcus looked up at Maria, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Not the invisible cleaning woman, but Elena, the brilliant translator who'd spoken 6 languages, who'd laughed at his jokes, who'd made him feel human for 3 precious months. "I read your letter," he lied, then corrected himself immediately. "No, I didn't. I threw it away. I was angry and scared, and I threw it away without reading it." Maria nodded, unsurprised. "It said I was pregnant. It said I loved you, but I would raise the baby alone if that's what you wanted. It said goodbye." The weight of 9 lost years settled on Marcus's shoulders like concrete. 9 years of his daughter growing up in poverty while he accumulated billions. 9 years of missing first words, first steps, first everything. 9 years of Elise learning to play piano on a broken keyboard while he owned 3 Steinways he barely touched. But as he looked at this incredible child, so talented, so kind, so utterly fearless, he realized something that shocked him to his core. Maybe Maria had saved them both by keeping them apart. Maybe he needed to become someone worthy of being Elise's father before he could claim that right. The question was it too late to become that man? Marcus stood slowly, his legs unsteady beneath him. The massive ballroom felt smaller now, intimate in a way it had never been during all his corporate celebrations. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sparkled like a jewelry box, but he barely saw it. His entire universe had collapsed down to 2 people, the woman who'd loved him and the daughter who'd inherited his eyes, but somehow avoided his coldness. "Maria," he said carefully, testing the name. "Elena, what do you want me to call you?" "Maria is fine," she replied, still holding Elise protectively. "Elena died 9 years ago when you chose business over everything else." The words stung because they were true. Marcus had spent 9 years building an empire while his daughter grew up in poverty. While she learned piano on a broken keyboard in a cramped apartment, he'd been acquiring art and houses and companies he'd never enjoyed. "Where do you live?" he asked. Maria hesitated, then lifted her chin with defiant pride. "Washington Heights, a studio apartment above Santos Market." Marcus knew the area, a working-class neighborhood where families crowded into small spaces and made every dollar count. The opposite of his world of penthouse apartments and endless luxury. "The piano lessons," he said. "Elise said she taught herself." "There's a community center," Maria explained reluctantly. "Sometimes they let children practice on their old upright piano, but mostly yes, she learned from YouTube videos and library books." Marcus felt physically sick. His daughter was a prodigy, possibly one of the most talented young pianists in the world, and she'd been learning from YouTube because her father was too proud and too stupid to read a letter. "I want to help," he said. "I want to do the right thing." The right thing? Maria's voice carried 9 years of bitterness. "The right thing was reading my letter. The right thing was answering one of those 57 phone calls. The right thing was being a father when your daughter needed one. Elise tugged on her mother's uniform sleeve. "Mama, don't be angry. He's trying now." The simple wisdom in those words silenced both adults. Marcus stared at his daughter, amazed by her capacity for forgiveness. At 8 years old, she was already more emotionally mature than he'd ever been. "I have money," Marcus said awkwardly. "I can pay for lessons, for school, for anything you need." "We don't need your money," Maria snapped. "We've managed fine without you." But even as she said it, Marcus could see the exhaustion in her face, the way her uniform hung loose from too many missed meals, the worn shoes that needed replacing. They weren't managing fine, they were surviving, and barely. "What about what Elise needs?" he asked quietly. "She's extraordinary. Her talent. Maria, she could be one of the greatest pianists of her generation, but not learning from YouTube videos." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Maria's face. She looked at her daughter, who was running her small fingers over the Steinway's keys, with reverence. "Mr. Stone," Elise said suddenly, "do you have children?" The innocent question hit him like a gunshot. "No," he said automatically, then stopped. I thought I didn't, but now I think maybe I do." Elise tilted her head, considering this. "Do you want children?" Another impossible question from his impossible daughter. Marcus had spent 45 years convinced he was too selfish, too driven, too cold to be a father. But looking at Elise, brilliant, kind, fearless Elise, he felt something awakening in his chest that he'd thought was dead. "I want them," he said honestly. "I want to be the kind of man who could be a good father." "Then practice," Elise said simply. "That's how I learned piano." "You practice until you get better." Maria stared at her daughter in amazement. At 8 years old, Elise was solving problems that had tormented adults for years with the simple logic of a child's wisdom. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled to his contacts. "Patricia Hoffman," he said, "the woman who was asking about your teacher. She's married to the conductor of the New York Philharmonic. She could arrange lessons with the best piano teachers in the world." "We can't afford," Maria began. "I'm not asking you to take my money," Marcus interrupted. "I'm asking you to let me invest in my daughter's future. There's a difference." The word hung in the air between them. Daughter. He'd said it out loud for the first time, and somehow that made it real. Maria looked at Elise, who was still exploring the piano keys with wonder. "What do you want, Mija? It's your choice." Elise turned those steel-grey eyes on Marcus, studying him with unnerving intensity. "Can I ask you something first?" "Anything. If I let you help me with piano, will you try to take me away from Mama?" The question revealed the fear that had kept them apart for 9 years. Marcus felt his heart break for this child who'd learned to be suspicious of gifts with strings attached. "Never," he said firmly. "Your mama is your mama. Nothing will ever change that. And if I'm not good enough? If I disappoint you?" Marcus knelt down to her level again. "Elise, you could never disappoint me. You're already the most amazing person I've ever met." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but I have conditions." Marcus almost smiled. She was definitely his daughter, already negotiating like a stone. "What conditions?" "Mama keeps her job if she wants it. We don't have to move, and you have to learn to be nice." "Nice? You were mean to me tonight. That made Mama cry. If you want to be my father, you have to learn to be nice to people." Marcus looked at this 8-year-old child who was demanding he become a better human being as the price of her love. It should have been insulting. Instead, it was the most hopeful moment of his life. "Deal," he said, extending his hand for a shake. Elise took it solemnly, her small fingers disappearing in his. "Deal." But you have to practice being nice every day, just like piano. As Marcus shook his daughter's hand, he realized she'd just given him something he'd been searching for his entire life, without knowing it. A reason to become the man he was supposed to be. 3 weeks later, Marcus Stone sat in the back of Carnegie Hall, his hands gripping the program so tightly the paper was beginning to tear. Around him, the greatest names in classical music filled the legendary venue for what was being billed as an evening of young prodigies. But Marcus only cared about one name on the program, Elise Rodriguez, age 8, performing Chopin's Ballade No. 1. The past 3 weeks had been the strangest of Marcus's life. He'd moved carefully, quietly, arranging lessons with Patricia Hoffman's husband, the conductor. He'd found Elise's family a better apartment in the same neighborhood, not a mansion, just a safe 2-bedroom where Elise could practice without disturbing neighbors. Most importantly, he'd been learning to be nice. It was harder than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. "She's nervous," Maria whispered beside him. She'd refused his offer of prime seats, insisting they sit where normal people sat. But she'd accepted his help with Elise's music, and slowly, carefully, she was beginning to trust him again. On stage, Elise sat at the concert grand piano, her small figure dwarfed by the massive instrument. She'd insisted on wearing her favorite dress, the same $15 one from the Christmas party, now carefully cleaned and pressed. Marcus had offered to buy her something new, but she'd refused. "This is my lucky dress," she'd explained. "It's the dress I was wearing when I met my father." The words still took his breath away. My father. She'd started calling him that tentatively, testing the words. Each time she said it, Marcus felt something healing inside his chest. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra began the gentle introduction that would lead into Elise's solo. Marcus held his breath, watching his daughter's small hands hover over the keys. Then she began to play. If her performance at the Christmas party had been miraculous, this was transcendent. 3 weeks of professional coaching had refined her natural talent into something that belonged in the realm of legend. The melody soared through Carnegie Hall, carrying with it 9 years of longing, hope, and love that had survived despite everything. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face and didn't care. Around him, the audience was completely silent, afraid to break the spell. Even the orchestra members were staring at Elise in amazement. They'd played with child prodigies before, but never anyone like this. But it wasn't just the technical perfection that moved people to tears. It was the emotion pouring from this 8-year-old girl's soul. She was telling the story of her life through Chopin's music, the story of a little girl who'd learned to make beauty from broken things, who'd found love in unexpected places, who'd taught her father what it meant to be human. As the final notes faded into silence, the audience erupted. The standing ovation went on for 7 minutes. Marcus counted every second, his heart swelling with pride that threatened to crack his ribs. "Papa," Elise said later backstage, using the name that had evolved naturally over the past weeks. "Did I do okay?" Marcus knelt down and pulled her into his arms, something that had taken weeks of practice to feel natural. "You were perfect. Absolutely perfect." "The New York Times wants to interview her," Maria said, still looking stunned. "Lincoln Center called, and there's a man from Juilliard who wants to arrange an audition." Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on his daughter. "Elise, all these people want to help you become famous. Is that what you want?" She considered the question with her usual seriousness. "I want to make beautiful music. If people like listening to it, that's good. But mostly I just want to play." The simplicity of her answer reminded Marcus why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. She wasn't driven by ambition or ego. She just wanted to create beauty. "There's something I need to tell you both," he said, his heart hammering. He'd been planning this moment for days, and now it was here. I've been thinking about what kind of father I want to be, what kind of man I want to be. Maria tensed beside him, probably expecting some demand or ultimatum. But Marcus had learned something important over the past 3 weeks. Love wasn't about taking, it was about giving. "I'm changing my will," he announced. "Everything I own, the company, the houses, the money, it's all going to Elise when she turns 25. The words hit Maria like a physical blow. "Marcus, no, that's too much. She's just a little girl." "She's my daughter," Marcus said firmly. "My only child. Everything I've built belongs to her." But what if Maria started, then stopped herself? What if what? "Dad, what if you have other children? What if you get married?" Marcus looked at his daughter, then at the woman who'd raised her into this incredible human being. "I can't imagine loving anyone more than I love you two. And even if someday I have other children, Elise will always be my first, my miracle." Elise threw her arms around his neck, and Marcus felt the last wall around his heart crumble completely. "Does this mean we're a real family now?" she whispered against his ear. Marcus looked over her head at Maria, who was crying openly. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a cleaning woman, invisible to the world. Tonight, she was the mother of the most celebrated young pianist in America and the woman who'd saved Marcus Stone's soul. "We've always been a real family," he said quietly. "We just didn't know it yet." But as they celebrated backstage at Carnegie Hall, none of them noticed the man in the expensive suit taking photos from the shadows. None of them saw him slip away to make a phone call that would change everything. The media storm was coming, and it would test their newfound family in ways none of them could imagine. The first photograph appeared on the front page of the New York Post at 6 a.m. sharp. "Billionaire's secret love child, Stone Empire, heir discovered at Carnegie Hall." Below it, a grainy but unmistakable image of Marcus embracing Elise backstage, their identical steel-grey eyes clearly visible, even in the shadowy lighting. Marcus's phone started ringing at 6:02 a.m. and didn't stop. By 6:15, news vans were parked outside his Manhattan penthouse. By 6:30, they'd found Maria and Elise's apartment in Washington Heights, forcing them to barricade themselves inside while reporters pounded on their door. "Papa, why are all these people yelling?" Elise asked, peering through the curtains at the chaos below. Her voice was small and frightened, the confident little pianist from last night, replaced by a confused 8-year-old who didn't understand why strangers were screaming her name. Marcus held his phone away from his ear as his corporate lawyer shouted about damage control and stock prices. Through the window of Maria's small apartment, he could see at least 20 reporters, their cameras trained on every window like weapons. "Elise! Elise Rodriguez! How does it feel to be worth $20 billion? The shouts carried up from the street, making Maria flinch with each word. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said, his mind racing through options. "My security team can—" "No!" Maria interrupted firmly. "I won't let you turn our lives into some corporate strategy. Elise isn't a business problem to be managed." But even as she spoke, they could hear the crowd growing larger. Someone had leaked their address, and now every news outlet in America was descending on Washington Heights like locusts. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his head of security. "Sir, TMZ offering $100,000 for exclusive interview with the girl. CNN wants to camp outside the building. Recommend immediate relocation to secure facility. They want to interview me," Elise asked, having caught fragments of the conversation. "Like a real pianist." The innocent question broke Marcus's heart. His daughter thought the attention was about her music, not understanding that the world saw her as a commodity, the secret heiress to a business empire. "Not exactly, Mia," Maria said gently, pulling Elise away from the window as a telephoto lens appeared on the fire escape outside. "They want to talk about money and families and grown-up things." Marcus watched his daughter's face fall and felt rage building in his chest. 3 weeks ago, Elise had been a happy child whose biggest concern was practicing piano. Now she was trapped in her own home by strangers who wanted to turn her private life into entertainment. His phone rang again, this time his business partner, James Chen, calling in a panic. "Marcus, the board is freaking out. The stock dropped 12% in the first hour of trading. They're calling an emergency meeting. Let it drop." Marcus said curtly. "What? Marcus, you can't be serious. This scandal." "It's not a scandal," Marcus snapped. "It's my daughter." But as he hung up, he realized the implications were bigger than stock prices. Stone Industries employed over 50,000 people. If the company collapsed because of this media storm, thousands of families would lose their jobs. His personal crisis was becoming a public catastrophe. The doorbell rang, followed by aggressive knocking. "Ms. Rodriguez, New York Times. We'd like to offer you an exclusive opportunity to tell your story." "Mama," Elise whispered, "are we in trouble?" Before Maria could answer, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He stood up, straightened his tie, and walked toward the door. "What are you doing?" Maria demanded. "Ending this," Marcus said grimly. He opened the door to face a wall of cameras and microphones, the hallway packed solid with reporters who'd somehow gotten past building security. "Mr. Stone, is it true that you abandoned your daughter for 8 years? How much money will the child inherit? Was this a publicity stunt to boost your image?" Marcus held up his hand, and the questions gradually died down. For 30 years, he'd commanded boardrooms filled with hostile executives. Managing a crowd of reporters was just another performance. "I'll make one statement," he said, his voice carrying clearly down the hallway. "Then I want you to leave this family alone." The cameras focused on him like laser beams. Behind him, he could feel Maria and Elise watching, waiting to see what kind of man he really was when everything was on the line. "8 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the chaos in his heart. "I ignored a letter from a woman I cared about. I refused to take her phone calls. I chose business over love. And I lost the chance to be a father to the most incredible little girl in the world." The hallway went dead silent. This wasn't the corporate spin they'd expected. 3 weeks ago, I discovered I have a daughter. Her name is Elise, and she's 8 years old, and she's the most talented, kind, and brave person I've ever met. Her mother, Maria, raised her to be everything good that I'm not. Marcus paused, feeling the weight of every word. "Yes, I'm changing my will to leave everything to Elise, not because she's my daughter, but because she deserves a chance to use that money to make the world more beautiful, the way she makes everything more beautiful, just by being in it." "Mr. Stone," he called a reporter from CNN, "what do you say to critics who claim this is a calculated move to improve your reputation?" Marcus looked directly into the camera. "I don't care about my reputation anymore. I only care about being worthy of the love my daughter has somehow chosen to give me." He started to turn away, then stopped. "One more thing. Anyone who harasses my family, who follows my 8-year-old daughter, who makes her afraid to leave her home, you'll answer to me personally, and I promise you don't want that." The threat hung in the air like smoke. These reporters had investigated Marcus Stone for years. They knew his reputation for destroying people who crossed him. As he closed the door, Marcus realized he'd just declared war on the entire media establishment, but looking at Elise's grateful smile and Maria's proud nod, he knew it was a war worth fighting. The headlines the next morning were even worse. "Stone's threat. Billionaire declares war on free press." But something unexpected happened alongside the media firestorm. Public opinion began to shift in Marcus's favor. "He's protecting his little girl," said a comment with 10,000 likes on the New York Post's website. "Any father would do the same thing. Did you see that child play piano? She's a literal angel. Leave them alone. I read another viral tweet. Marcus discovered this while hiding in his corporate office at 5 a.m., trying to avoid the reporters camped outside his building. His head of public relations, Sandra Kim, had been fielding calls all night from talk shows, magazine editors, and documentary filmmakers who wanted exclusive access to America's most fascinating family drama. The good news is that 73% of social media sentiment is positive, Sandra reported, her usually perfect composure frayed by exhaustion. The bad news is that TMZ is offering $1 million for anyone with information about your past relationship with Maria. Marcus felt his blood run cold. $1 million could buy a lot of lies from people willing to invent stories about his time with Elena 9 years ago. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Elise asking when she can go back to school. Kids are scared to come near building because of reporters. The words hit him like a physical blow. His daughter's normal life was being destroyed by his fame. The other children in her building were afraid to play outside because of the media circus surrounding her family. Sir, Sandra continued, I think we need to consider a controlled media strategy. Maybe a sit-down interview with someone sympathetic. No, Marcus said firmly, my daughter isn't a product to be marketed. But even as he said it, Marcus knew they couldn't hide forever. The story was growing larger every day, and eventually the pressure would become unbearable. His assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission, something she'd never done in 15 years. Mr. Stone, I'm sorry, but there's a woman here who says it's urgent. She claims to know something about Elise's birth father. Marcus's heart stopped. Send her in. The woman who entered was in her 60s, well-dressed but nervous. She clutched a manila envelope like a lifeline and kept glancing toward the door as if planning her escape. Mr. Stone, she said in a shaky voice, my name is Dr. Margaret Walsh. I was Elena Rodriguez's obstetrician 9 years ago. The room went dead silent. Sandra looked confused, but Marcus understood immediately. This woman had been there when Elise was born. I shouldn't be here, Dr. Walsh continued. But I've been watching the news, and I can't stay silent anymore. There are things about Elise's birth that you need to know. Marcus felt the world tilting around him. What things? Dr. Walsh opened the envelope with trembling fingers and pulled out a medical file. Elena came to me in her 7th month of pregnancy. She was terrified, Mr. Stone. Not of being a single mother, she was terrified of you. The words hit Marcus like bullets. Of me. She'd tried to contact you dozens of times, but your people kept blocking her calls. She was convinced you'd either try to take the baby away or use your power to destroy her life if she pressed the issue. Marcus sank into his chair, remembering his secretary's casual mentions of some woman who kept calling about personal matters. He'd been so focused on a major acquisition that he'd ordered all personal calls blocked without exception. Elena made me promise something, Dr. Walsh continued. If anything ever happened to her, if you ever came looking for answers, I was supposed to give you this. She handed him a sealed letter, yellowed with age but still intact. Marcus's name was written across the front in Eleanor's careful handwriting. She wrote it the day after Elise was born, Dr. Walsh explained. She said you deserved to know the truth, even if you never wanted to be part of their lives. Marcus stared at the letter, his hands shaking. 9 years ago, he'd thrown away Elena's first letter without reading it. Now he had a second chance. But was he brave enough to take it? There's something else, Dr. Walsh said quietly. Elena didn't just disappear 9 years ago. She tried one more time to reach you when Elise was 6 months old. She came to your office building. That's impossible. I would have known. Your security threw her out, Dr. Walsh said, her voice heavy with old anger. A young woman with a baby, asking to see Marcus Stone. They assumed she was another gold digger trying to scam you. They threatened to have her arrested if she ever came back. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. Eleanor had brought Elise to see him. His 6-month-old daughter had been in his building, and he'd never known because his own security had turned them away. After that, she gave up completely, Dr. Walsh continued. She took a job as a cleaning woman at your company because it was the only way to be close to you without being recognized. She thought maybe someday Elise would meet you by accident, and you'd realize what you'd lost. The truth hit Marcus like an avalanche. Elena hadn't disappeared. She'd been invisible in plain sight for 8 years, cleaning his office every night, hoping for a miracle. And 3 weeks ago, that miracle had finally happened when their daughter asked to play piano at a Christmas party. "Why are you telling me this now?" Marcus whispered. Dr. Walsh looked toward the window, where they could hear the distant sounds of reporters shouting questions at anyone entering or leaving the building. "Because that little girl deserves to know her father really loves her," she said simply. "Not his money or his power or his reputation, just him." Marcus looked down at Elena's letter. Knowing it held 9 years of truth he'd been too proud to hear. But before he could read it, his phone exploded with an urgent call from Maria. "Marcus!" Her voice was panicked. "Something's wrong. Elise is sick. Really sick. I'm calling an ambulance." The letter fell forgotten to the floor as Marcus ran for the door, his heart hammering with a terror he'd never experienced. For the first time in his life, Marcus Stone had something more important than money or power or reputation. He had a daughter who needed him. Marcus's Lamborghini screamed through Manhattan traffic as he raced toward Mount Sinai Hospital, his security team struggling to keep up. Behind them, a convoy of news vans followed like vultures, their cameras capturing every moment of his panic for the evening broadcast. He'd never felt terror like this, pure, consuming fear that made every business crisis seem trivial by comparison. During the 20-minute drive, his mind conjured 1,000 horrible possibilities. What if he'd found his daughter only to lose her? What if 8 years of poverty and stress had damaged her health in ways money couldn't fix? The emergency room was chaos. Reporters had somehow gotten inside, their cameras rolling as Marcus burst through the doors. Security guards were trying to establish a perimeter. But the hospital staff looked overwhelmed by the media circus surrounding their young patient. "Where is she?" Marcus demanded of the first doctor he saw. "Mr. Stone, I'm Dr. Jennifer Park, Elise's attending physician. She's stable, but we need to talk privately." Dr. Park led him through a maze of corridors to a small consultation room, closing the door firmly against the pursuing cameras. Through the window, Marcus could see news helicopters circling the hospital like mechanical buzzards. "Your daughter has pneumonia," Dr. Park said without preamble. "It's serious, but treatable. However, there are some concerning factors we need to discuss." Marcus felt his legs go weak. "What factors?" "Elise is severely underweight for her age and height. Her medical history shows no regular checkups, no preventive care, minimal dental work. Mr. Stone, this child has been living in poverty for a long time." Each word hit Marcus like a physical blow. While he'd been accumulating billions, his daughter had been slowly starving. While he owned houses he never visited, she'd been living in conditions that damaged her health. "The pneumonia likely developed because her immune system is compromised from chronic malnutrition," Dr. Park continued. "She'll recover, but she needs immediate nutritional support and comprehensive medical care. Whatever she needs," Marcus said hoarsely, "whatever it costs. The best doctors, the best treatment." "Mr. Stone," Dr. Park interrupted gently, "money can't fix 8 years of neglect overnight. Elise's recovery will take time, patience, and consistent care." Through the consultation room window, Marcus could see Maria sitting beside Elise's bed. holding their daughter's small hand while machines monitored her vital signs. Even sick and unconscious, Elise looked painfully fragile. A bird-like child who'd been carrying burdens far too heavy for her delicate frame. "Can I see her?" Dr. Park nodded. "But Mr. Stone, the media attention is making this very difficult for our staff and other patients. Hospital security is requesting that you consider moving Elise to a private facility." Marcus understood the subtext. His presence was turning his daughter's medical emergency into a public spectacle. Even here, even now. His fame was hurting the people he loved. "I'll handle it," he said grimly. He entered Elise's room quietly, his heart breaking at the sight of his daughter connected to IV tubes and oxygen monitors. Maria looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, her fear and exhaustion evident. "The doctor says she'll be okay," Maria whispered. "But Marcus, I'm scared. She's been getting weaker for months, and I couldn't afford proper medical care. I kept telling myself she was just tired from practicing so much." Marcus knelt beside the bed, gently touching Elise's forehead. Her skin was hot with fever, but she stirred at his touch. "Papa," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm here." "Sweetheart, I'm right here." "The reporters," she said weakly. "They're so loud they scare me." Marcus felt rage building in his chest. Not the cold fury of business negotiations, but the protective anger of a father whose child was being hunted. Through the hospital room window, he could see photographers with telephoto lenses trying to capture images of Elise in her hospital bed. "Maria," he said quietly, "I'm going to fix this, but I need you to trust me." Before she could respond, Marcus was on his phone with his head of security. "Clear the hospital. I don't care what it costs. Buy out every camera. Threaten every reporter. Get them away from my daughter. Now." Within an hour, the hospital was a fortress. Marcus's security team had established a perimeter 3 blocks wide, and his legal team was serving cease and desist orders to every news outlet in the city. The photographers who'd been trying to get pictures of Elise suddenly found themselves facing lawsuits that could bankrupt them. But the real solution came from an unexpected source. "Mr. Stone," said Dr. Park, returning to Elise's room. "We've received an unusual offer. Patricia Hoffman, you know. The conductor's wife has arranged for Elise to be transferred to a private pediatric facility in the Hamptons. Complete privacy, world-class medical care, and a piano for when she's feeling better." Marcus looked at Maria, who was still holding their daughter's hand like a lifeline. "It's your choice," he said. "Whatever you think is best for Elise." Maria studied his face for a long moment. "You really mean that, don't you? It's not about what you want or what looks good for business. It's about what's best for her." "She's the most important thing in my world," Marcus said simply. "Nothing else matters." Maria nodded slowly. "Okay. But we go together, all 3 of us. No separation, no matter what your lawyers or publicists say." "Together," Marcus agreed. As they prepared for the transfer, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his corporate board. "Emergency meeting tomorrow. Stock down 23%. Board considering vote of no confidence." For the first time in his business career, Marcus deleted the message without a second thought. Stone Industries could wait. His daughter needed him now, but as Elise was carefully moved to the ambulance for transport to the Hamptons facility, neither Marcus nor Maria noticed the man in the orderly uniform who'd been listening to their conversation. By morning, every detail of their private moment would be splashed across the tabloids, and Marcus would learn that when you're worth $20 billion, privacy is a luxury that money can't always buy. The private medical facility in the Hamptons was everything Dr. Park had promised, a converted mansion overlooking the Atlantic, with world-class equipment hidden behind the facade of a luxury resort. Elise had been recovering there for 5 days, her pneumonia responding well to treatment, when Marcus's world exploded for the second time. The call came at 6 a.m. from Sandra Kim, his head of public relations, her voice tight with panic. "Marcus, we have a problem. A big one." Marcus was instantly alert, stepping out of Elise's room, where she was finally sleeping peacefully. "What now?" "Someone leaked your financial records, everything, your net worth, your offshore accounts, your real estate holdings, but that's not the worst part." Marcus felt ice forming in his veins. "What's the worst part?" "They have Elena's medical records from 9 years ago. The pregnancy, the birth, even records showing she tried to contact you dozens of times. Marcus, they know everything." The phone nearly slipped from Marcus's hands. Elena's private medical information, information that should have been protected by doctor-patient confidentiality, was now public knowledge. How is that possible? "We're investigating, but Marcus, the story breaks in 2 hours. The headline is, 'Stone Cold, How America's Cruelest CEO Abandoned His Pregnant Girlfriend.'" Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the walls of his carefully constructed life crashing down around him. Everything he'd tried to protect, his privacy, his dignity, his relationship with Elise, was about to be destroyed by strangers who saw his family's pain as entertainment. "There's more," Sandra continued. "Your board scheduled an emergency vote for this afternoon. They're going to remove you as CEO." The news should have devastated him. Stone Industries was his life's work, his legacy, his identity. But as he looked through the window at Elise sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks, Marcus realized something had fundamentally changed inside him. "Let them vote," he said quietly. "What?" "Marcus, you can't be serious. This is your company." "No," Marcus interrupted. "It was my company. Now it's just a business, and businesses can be replaced. My daughter can't be." He hung up and walked back into Elise's room, where Maria was reading quietly in a chair beside the bed. She looked up at his expression and immediately knew something was wrong. "What is it?" Marcus told her everything: the leaked records, the board meeting, the media storm that was about to get infinitely worse. Maria listened in growing horror as he described how their most private moments were about to become public entertainment. "They have Elena's medical files?" Maria's voice was barely a whisper. "Her pregnancy records? Her attempts to contact you?" Marcus nodded grimly. "I'm going to destroy whoever did this. I'll spend every penny I have hunting them down." "No," Maria said firmly. "That's the old Marcus talking, the one who solved everything with money and power and revenge." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the grey December ocean. "Maybe this is what needed to happen." Marcus stared at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we've been hiding for the wrong reasons. Maybe the world needs to know that powerful men can change, that families can heal, that love is more important than reputation." Before Marcus could respond, a small voice came from the bed. "Is someone talking about me?" They turned to see Elise awake, her fever finally broken, colour returning to her pale cheeks. She looked stronger than she had in weeks, and her steel-grey eyes were clear and bright. "How do you feel, Mija?" Maria asked, rushing to her daughter's side. "Better. Much better." Elise sat up carefully, looking between her parents. "But you both look worried. Are the reporters bothering us again?" Marcus felt his heart clench. Even sick, even vulnerable, his 8-year-old daughter was more concerned about their feelings than her own discomfort. "There might be more stories about us," he said carefully. "Some people are saying mean things about Papa, about the choices I made before you were born." Elise considered this with her usual seriousness. Are the mean things true? The question hit Marcus like lightning. His daughter wasn't asking if the stories would hurt his reputation or damage his business. She was asking if he was the kind of man who deserved criticism. Some of them are true, Marcus admitted. I made terrible mistakes. I hurt your mama, and I missed 8 years of your life because I was too proud and too scared to do the right thing. But you're not that person anymore, Elise said simply. People can change. I've watched you change. Maria gasped softly. Mija, what do you mean? Papa used to be afraid of everything, afraid of loving people, afraid of being hurt, afraid of not being perfect. But now he's not afraid anymore. He holds my hand when I'm scared. He sits with me when I can't sleep. He learned to be nice. Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. His 8-year-old daughter had seen straight through to the heart of everything, the fear that had driven his cruelty, the transformation that love had brought, the man he was becoming instead of the man he'd been. So let them tell their stories, Elise continued, reaching for both her parents' hands. The people who matter will see the truth, and the people who don't see the truth don't matter. Marcus looked at his daughter, this incredible, wise, fearless little girl who'd somehow learned to see the world with clarity that adults spent lifetimes seeking. She was right. The stories would come and go, but the love they'd built together was real and strong and unbreakable. His phone buzzed with another urgent call from his corporate office, but Marcus turned it off without looking. For the first time in his life, he had something more important than business. He had a family worth fighting for, but none of them realized that the real fight was just beginning. Because that afternoon, while Marcus was learning to choose love over power, his corporate board was making a decision that would threaten everything they'd built together. The vote was unanimous. Marcus Stone was no longer CEO of Stone Industries, and the new leadership had very different plans for his $20 billion fortune. The news of Marcus's removal hit the financial world like a tsunami. By 4 p.m., Stone Industries stock had plummeted 40%, wiping out $8 billion in market value. Emergency meetings were called in boardrooms across Manhattan as investors tried to understand what the corporate coup meant for their portfolios. But Marcus learned about his professional execution, not from the financial news or his lawyers, but from Elise herself. "Papa," she said, looking up from the tablet where she'd been reading stories on a kid's news website, "it says here you're not the boss of your company anymore. Is that true?" Marcus felt the surreal nature of the moment wash over him. He'd lost control of his life's work, but he was finding out from his 8-year-old daughter, who was reading about it on a children's news site while recovering from pneumonia in a medical facility. "Yes, sweetheart, it's true. Are you sad about it?" Marcus considered the question seriously. He should be devastated. Stone Industries had been his identity for 25 years. But looking at Elise's improving color, at Maria's worried but loving face, at the peaceful room where his daughter was finally healing, he realized something shocking. "No," he said, surprised by his own honesty. "I'm not sad about it." "Good," Elise said matter-of-factly, "because now you can spend more time with us." The simple wisdom of her response made Marcus laugh, actually laugh, for the first time in weeks. His daughter had reduced the most significant professional crisis of his life to a scheduling opportunity, but Maria looked troubled. "Marcus, what does this mean? For Elise's inheritance, for her future?" Before Marcus could answer, his lawyer, James Morrison, burst through the door, his usually perfect composure completely shattered. "Marcus, we have a catastrophic problem." "I figured that out when they fired me," Marcus said dryly. "No, you don't understand. The board didn't just remove you as CEO. They're challenging your right to transfer assets to Elise. They're claiming that your decision to change your will was made under emotional duress and isn't legally valid." The words hit Marcus like a physical assault. "What does that mean?" "It means they're arguing that discovering you had a daughter caused temporary insanity, and that your decision to leave everything to an 8-year-old girl proves you're mentally unfit to control a $20 billion fortune. Marcus felt rage building in his chest. Not the cold fury of business warfare, but the burning anger of a father whose child was being attacked. They're using Elise against me. It gets worse. James continued. They're requesting a full psychiatric evaluation and temporary conservatorship of your assets. If they win, everything gets frozen until the courts determine your mental fitness to make financial decisions. Maria stood up abruptly. You mean they could take Elise's inheritance? They could take everything, James said grimly. The houses, the investments, the trust funds, all of it locked up in legal battles that could last for years. Marcus looked at his daughter, who was listening to this conversation with growing alarm. Elise might only be 8, but she understood that strangers were trying to hurt her family. Papa, she said in a small voice, did I cause this? Because you decided to give me money. The question shattered Marcus's heart. His daughter, his brilliant, kind, innocent daughter, was blaming herself for the greed and cruelty of adults who saw her as an obstacle to wealth. No, sweetheart, Marcus said firmly, this isn't your fault. This is about grown-ups who care more about money than they do about families. But privately, Marcus was calculating the implications. If the board succeeded in their legal challenge, Elise would grow up knowing that her inheritance had been stolen by people who considered her an illegitimate inconvenience. The money was secondary. It was the message that terrified him. There's one more thing, James said reluctantly. The board is arguing that your relationship with Maria was never a legitimate partnership, and that Elise doesn't qualify as your legal heir under the company's succession protocols. What does that mean? Maria asked, her voice deadly quiet. It means they're questioning Elise's paternity. The room went dead silent. Marcus felt something snap inside his chest. Not anger now, but cold, calculating fury that reminded him exactly why he'd been feared in boardrooms for decades. They want a paternity test, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They're demanding one, James confirmed, and if you refuse, they'll use that as evidence that you know Elise isn't really your daughter. Marcus looked at Maria, whose face had gone pale as death. They both knew the truth. Elise was absolutely his daughter, and a paternity test would prove it conclusively. But the implication was devastating. The corporate world was treating their child like a fraud, like a scam, like an inconvenient lie. Do the test, Marcus said suddenly. Marcus, no, Maria protested. She's just a little girl. She shouldn't have to prove she deserves her father's love. She's not proving she deserves love, Marcus said, his voice hardening into the tone that had once terrorized competitors. She's proving that I'm her father, so I can destroy every single person who tried to hurt her. For the first time since his corporate exile began, Marcus felt the old predator awakening. But this time, he wasn't fighting for money or power or reputation. He was fighting for his daughter's right to exist without justifying herself to anyone. James, Marcus continued, schedule the paternity test for tomorrow morning. Make it public, make it official, and make sure every member of that board sees the results. And then, Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. Then I remind them why they used to be afraid of me. Elise looked between her parents, sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Papa, are you going to fight those men? Yes, sweetheart, I'm going to fight them. Will you win? Marcus knelt down beside her bed, taking his daughter's small hand in his. Elise, there's something you need to understand about your father. I've never lost a fight when it mattered, and nothing has ever mattered as much as you do. But as Marcus prepared for the battle of his life, none of them knew about the secret weapon his enemies had been saving for last, a weapon that would test not just Marcus's resolve, but the very foundation of the family they'd fought so hard to build. The paternity test results arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, delivered by courier to Marcus's temporary legal office in the Hamptons. James Morrison opened the envelope with trembling hands, while Marcus, Maria, and Elise waited in silence. 99.97% probability of paternity, James read. His voice filled with relief. Elise Rodriguez is definitively the biological daughter of Marcus Stone. Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. Not because he doubted the truth. He'd known since Christmas night that Elise was his daughter, but because now the world would know it too. "Does this mean the bad men have to stop being mean to us?" Elise asked from her hospital bed, where she was eating breakfast for the first time in days with real appetite. "It means Papa can fight them properly now," Marcus said, kissing her forehead. "And when Papa fights properly, he wins." But even as he spoke, Marcus's phone was exploding with calls from reporters, lawyers, and board members. The paternity results had been leaked within minutes of their delivery, and the media was in full feeding frenzy mode. "Stone's secret daughter confirmed," screamed the headlines. "Billionaire heiress is the real deal. Real." Sandra Kim called with an update that should have been good news. "Public opinion has shifted completely in your favor. Social media is calling the board's challenge cruel and heartless. Several major investors are demanding your reinstatement as CEO." But Marcus barely heard her. He was watching Elise try to process the fact that strangers had questioned whether she was really his daughter, whether she had the right to call him Papa. "The board is requesting an emergency meeting," Sandra continued. "They want to negotiate." "Tell them I'll meet with them at 2 p.m., Marcus said. "And Sandra? Make sure every major news outlet knows about the meeting. I want this fight to be public." Maria looked concerned. "Marcus, are you sure? The more public this gets, the harder it becomes for Elise to have a normal childhood." Marcus was about to respond when James Morrison's phone rang. The lawyer answered, his face growing pale as he listened. "That was my contact at Stone Industries," James said after hanging up. "The board just called an emergency press conference for noon. They say they have significant new evidence about your fitness as CEO and father." Marcus felt ice forming in his veins. "What new evidence?" They wouldn't say, but Marcus, they sounded confident. Really confident. For the first time since this battle began, Marcus felt genuine fear, not for himself, but for his family. What could the board possibly have discovered that they thought would destroy him? The answer came 2 hours later, broadcast live on every major news network. Marcus watched in horror as the board's chairman held up a document he recognized immediately, Elena's original letter from 9 years ago, the one he'd thrown away without reading. But somehow they'd retrieved it, and as the chairman began reading Elena's words aloud, Marcus realized his enemies had found the perfect weapon, his own past cruelty, preserved in his lost love's handwriting, broadcast to the world as proof that he'd never deserved to be a father at all. The letter revealed Elena's desperate pleas, her financial struggles, her fear that Marcus would reject their child, everything that painted him as the monster he'd once been. As the cameras captured every damning word, Marcus felt his carefully rebuilt world crashing down, knowing that this time love might not be enough to save his family from the truth of who he used to be.